Welcome back to CBSN. So we have been listening to President Obama take a number of questions about the U.S.'s strategy regarding ISIL. He did that there as he finished up his meetings at the G20 conference there in Antalya, Turkey. We heard questions from several reporters, including our own Margaret Brennan. But right now, standing by for us, we have our own Jeff Pegues, Homeland Security correspondent in Washington. Jeff, it was interesting to hear the president pressed on whether or not the strategy needed to be changed. Obviously, that has been something that's been discussed in the aftermath of the Paris attacks. He essentially said the strategy is working.
Well, yeah, he was on the defensive there. Wasn't he trying to defend what the administration has been doing in Syria and Iraq in regard to ISIS and countering the threat? And there was no indication there that he was going to change his plan. However, there will be a lot of pressure on the administration to change something after this attack in Paris. As you know, this is an attack that was carried out by teams of attackers, killers, going through that city, claiming victims. And so this has been a real shock to the system in the U.S., in Europe, where this scale of attack by ISIS has not been seen before. So there is a drumbeat right now, really, for the administration to somehow change course, somehow change the strategy. And also law enforcement is looking at, how do you counter this type of threat? So there are all sorts of challenges now that the administration is facing just days after this attack in Paris.
Jeff, one of the big questions that a lot of people here have as they look at the aftermath of what happened in Paris, clearly there are numbers of refugees coming into not just Europe, but also here in the United States. Already 2 governors of American states, Alabama and Michigan, have said that they will not accept Syrian refugees. Like the danger or the threat being that one of those refugees could potentially launch an attack similarly to what we saw in Paris on Friday. So what is the Homeland Security Department doing to address that very serious concern Americans have?
Well, right now, there is no change in policy. I spoke to a Department of Homeland Security official who told me that right now there is no change in policy. And here's why. They believe that the screening process that they have in place right now is effective, is thorough. So at this point, there is no desire on their part, at least right now it doesn't look like there is no desire to change course in terms of how they are screening these refugees.
Jeff, what about ISIS threats that this country has been able to prevent? I mean, we heard President Obama there. Can you tell us what U.S. officials have told you about that?
Well, there is a lot of concern about the way the attacks in Paris were carried out. And so now the focus is on, well, how do you guard against that? We have always heard from law enforcement. The reality is that the attackers only have to be right once. Law enforcement in this country has to be right every time. So they are facing challenges, and there is a lot of discussion about having better intelligence. And one way of doing that is having access to these encrypted apps. There has been a lot of conversation about that in the days since the Paris attacks. But what that is an effort on the part of law enforcement to have all of the tools that they feel are necessary to prevent something like that from happening here in the U.S. And right now, the feeling among law enforcement officials is that they don't have all those tools as long as they don't have access to some of this encrypted information. And so that is part of the debate right now.
Jeff, we know that ISIS has, in just the last 48 hours, released statements saying that they do plan on attacking the United States and Western Europe. But still, from your understanding and talking to Homeland Security officials, there are no specific or credible threats to the homeland as of this point.
Yeah, and we've heard that consistently throughout this weekend in the wake of those attacks, that there is no specific or credible threat against the U.S. We've asked several officials that very question, trying to find out if their posture has changed in the wake of the Paris attacks. And every time they come back to us and they say, no, the posture has not changed. There is no specific or credible threat against the U.S. In fact, we were wondering if there was going to be some sort of guidance going out to city and state officials, law enforcement officials from the Department of Homeland Security. From what we know, there have been discussions about that, but right now the feeling is that because there is no specific or credible threat, there is really no reason to do that. But you see across major cities in this country that local law enforcement are taking steps. They are beefing up security. And there are a myriad of reasons why they're doing that, in part to make sure that the public knows that the added security is there. But you are seeing law enforcement across this country on their own taking steps to beef up security at spots where the public gathers.
Do you have a sense, though, Jeff, how long that security is going to be beefed up? I mean, the question, I guess, really is when people look at what happened in Paris, Scott Pelley had a security official on last night on 60 Minutes who basically said this was a test run for other attacks against the West, including the United States. Have you had any sense from your conversations with law enforcement officials how long they plan to continue this?
Well, a lot of the answer to that question, I think it depends in part on what comes out of the investigation into the Paris attacks. It's hard to sort of look ahead and have an answer to that question. But I think it's fair to say that law enforcement, let's take New York, for example. There is always that heightened concern in New York. Law enforcement there has consistently, since 9/11, put in place the type of protection, security that they feel is warranted. And some of that is a show of force to make sure that people know that the defenses are up, the defense is in place. So it's hard to tell how long this security apparatus will be heightened. But it is not at all unusual for this kind of security to be put in place after a high-profile event like the one we saw on Friday.
Jeff, I want to play for you and our viewers the director of the CIA, John Brennan, making some comments about this. Let's listen in.
It's not a surprise that this attack was carried out from the standpoint of we did have strategic warning. We knew that these plans or plotting by ISIL was underway, looking at Europe in particular. I don't think we are underestimating at all the capabilities of ISIL. Its growth over the last several years. There is a real effort on the part of the United States and coalition countries to contain its spread inside of Iraq and Syria, and I think there has been a containment of that momentum. But as I said, there have been a number of successes that have prevented ISIL from moving people, moving material and other things to carry out attacks. But unfortunately, this attack several days ago in Paris just shows what devastating impact it can have, because their agenda is to kill, pure and simple. As I refer to them as murderous sociopaths. They have this sort of nihilistic sort of approach that they're just trying to kill as many people, young children, whatever, it doesn't matter to them. It's a warped, it's a twisted mentality, and that's why we have to do everything we can, as urgently as we can, in my view, to contain their growth inside of the Middle East, but also beyond.
And so, Jeff, when you hear the director there talking about this strategy of ISIS to kill as many people as possible, worse, we know in the past that al-Qaeda has targeted sort of big landscapes, government buildings, obviously the Twin Towers, the USS Cole. These are attacks that make a statement. Here we're seeing ISIS attack random restaurants, random bars, with the idea of killing as many people as they can without making a statement other than the fact that you cannot live without having fear that these attacks could happen. And so that becomes very difficult for law enforcement to protect against.
Well, you're right. These are the types of attacks, in a way, it's hitting in your neighborhood. For some people, 9/11 perhaps seemed like something in the past, something that maybe wasn't possible again. But what we see here with this type of attack, and that's why a lot of people feel the paradigm has changed here. This is hitting a restaurant. This is hitting a concert hall. So these are neighborhood locations, hitting close to home. So it sends a different kind of message, but it's exactly the type of message that ISIS has been trying to send. It's a message of fear, and you see it spread through social media, and that is something that the FBI director has talked about rather consistently, about this effort by ISIS to spread fear and spread their message through social media, and it has been happening. And there were warnings, as the FBI director, or the CIA director acknowledged there. This was not a surprise. There were signals from ISIS of their intent to strike Europe, to strike France. So that is why you heard him there saying that this was not something that came as a surprise.
Jeff Pegues in Washington. Jeff, thank you very, very much for your reporting and your insights.